Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with Sonia Sodha, the chief leader writer at The Observer, and Henry Hill, the deputy editor of ConservativeHome. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. We'll speak to them very shortly. But first, let's have a look at what's on some of those front pages. The Guardian leads with the attack in Nottingham, in which 3 people were killed. The Metro also leading on the attack, calling it a white van knife horror. The attacks in Nottingham also on the front of the Daily Mail. The Star's headline, Killers Rampage. And The Sun also calls the attack a rampage. The FT leads with the Governor of the Bank of England's words that inflation is taking a lot longer than hoped to come down. While the Eye says mortgage level stress is to hit levels last seen in the 1980s. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you're watching us. And we're joined tonight by Sonia Sodha and Henry Hill. So let's get started, shall we? Very good evening to you both. Thanks so much for joining us. A very sombre press preview looking ahead to tomorrow's front pages, the majority of them leading on the horrific scenes in Nottingham today. Sonia, your take on all of this to start with.
Yes, so absolutely terrible scenes unfolded in Nottingham today. There's still a lot that's unclear about what happened overnight. But what we do know is that 2 students, both aged 19, were stabbed to death by a 31-year-old suspect involved, and a man in his 50s was also killed, and police suspect that he was the owner of the white van that the suspected killer used to drive around after as well as the deaths of the 2 19-year-olds. The van was driven, again, the police think it was the same suspect, into some people. They are okay, I think it was 2 people. So there's still a lot that we simply don't know yet. We know that this was a 31-year-old suspect. There's absolutely no information yet about what his potential motivations might be. We know that the counter-terrorism police have been involved, but the police say that that is normal with an incident of this scale where they're making so many inquiries. It's obviously absolutely devastating for the families of the 2 students who've lost their lives and their friends in Nottingham, and for the whole student community in Nottingham. But I think there's a lot that we still don't know here yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And Henry, you know, there's no words to describe really how terrible this is. 2 teenagers on their way home from a night out and then, you know, stabbed to death. But of course, the big question hanging over people in Nottingham is why?
Yes, it is. And we simply don't know. You know, this is an ongoing and active police investigation. The suspect was only taken into custody today. And there is a natural tendency to fill that kind of void with speculation. But I think it's important that, we will know, we will find out, the police will release the information in due time, and we will have those answers. For the moment, I think it's important, one, that we make sure that, as the police will surely be doing, that there are no further attacks and that everybody is safe. And then it is important that we take the time to wait for the facts to emerge, that we don't rush to any conclusions or judgments. And that can be difficult when we have that void of information, because we naturally want to talk about something of this magnitude and we need to fill that space with something. But nothing good ever comes of doing that. So we will find out in due time. But for the moment, we simply don't know why this happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Police say they are keeping an open mind when it comes to the motive. And Sonia, I mean, there's not a huge amount of variety in terms of what's on the front pages tomorrow, but we're just going to mention the front page of The Sun now, which has the photographs of the 2 teenagers who they say were killed in Nottingham.
That's right. And as you said, it was, two 19-year-olds on the way home from a night out at 4 a.m. So it's a total tragedy. And as you would expect, this is a major national incident. It's been dominating news coverage all day. So you really would expect it to be on the vast majority of front pages, which it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Every parent's worst nightmare. Let's move on to the Financial Times. Henry, of course, one of the other big stories today is the COVID inquiry, which kicked off.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Dame Heather Hallett's inquiry, which may be familiar to viewers from the row between it and the Cabinet Office about the release of Boris Johnson's texts, which, due to the pace of events, already feels like it took place months ago. But in fact, my diary reminds me was in fact relatively recent. And this is the comprehensive investigation into what went wrong with or indeed right, in fairness, with the government's COVID response. It wants to investigate what lessons we can learn, whether the United Kingdom was prepared, and what good or bad steps were taken during that process. Now, it's mooted to take 3 years to complete. I don't think we're certain that it will take that long. Some of these judge-led inquiries have taken an awful lot longer to get to the truth. So I think there is a tension, and this is one of the problems with the way that we run public inquiries in this country, is that there is a tension between two of the objectives of the inquiry. The first is we want to find out what happened with the COVID response as quickly as possible so we can learn lessons. And the other is that we want to get really down into the guts of it so that we can find out who made bad decisions, assign blame, give some catharsis and closure to those who were affected by the pandemic and lost loved ones. Now, the first of those objectives would be better served by a much faster inquiry, a sort of an inquisitorial inquiry that maybe took evidence on a no blame basis, on a black box basis that wasn't published, and that could get to the lessons really quickly so we could apply them. And then this other process could be conducted separately, and it could take more time to go into those granular details. But at present, we're lumping both of those together into one. And so we are going to take longer to get to some of those answers about pandemic preparedness than I think it would probably be ideal.
Yeah, and Sonia, it was really interesting, wasn't it? The lead counsel of the inquiry had some very interesting comments to make on this today in the inquiry opening, in terms of the lack of preparedness for a COVID pandemic and the fact that the country was distracted by dealing with Brexit.
Yeah, so this is the barrister who advises the inquiry, and I think we're going to be hearing a mix of things that sound quite familiar to us as the inquiry goes on, and stuff that is new. But this is the first day, and the first stage of the inquiry will be looking at preparedness. And there's already been a lot of discussion about preparedness. There's been revelations about exercises that took place in Whitehall, for example, in preparation for a flu pandemic, where recommendations and findings were not acted upon. But I think there's going to be more that emerges through the course of the inquiry, and it's obviously been, in the news in recent days and weeks, because there is this legal battle between the government and between the inquiry itself in terms of what material the government has to hand over, and whether it's the government who gets to decide what's relevant, or whether it's the judge in charge who gets to decide what's in the public interest and what should be released to the public. So that those legal wrangles may yet delay things more. I agree with. I think it's very important that there is this statutory inquiry that's led by a judge, where she does have the power to summon witnesses, where she does have the power to demand documents. I think that's incredibly important. But I also think that actually we could have probably done the sort of more rapid review that Harry's talked about. To be honest, I think we could have done that by now. And indeed, a country like Sweden has already published their report. I've looked at some of the findings from that, for example. And so I think, optimally, we would have got the sort of rapid review with lessons for what we need to do differently if hope this won't happen, of course, but if another pandemic were to sort of drop on our door in the next couple of years, to have those lessons ready and waiting. But I do think that the statutory nature of this inquiry is really, really important, and you do need that thoroughness as well.
And Henry, of course, at the centre of this inquiry are the bereaved families, but there is also a sideshow in terms of Boris Johnson and his dispute with the Cabinet Office over, releasing material to the inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an ongoing dispute. Basically, the Dame Heather Hallett, the judge leading the inquiry, has requested that all of Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages with 40 key members of the government be handed over to the inquiry so that they can be reviewed and anything relevant can be included in the inquiry's remit. Now, the dispute from the Cabinet Office is the Cabinet Office is wanting to hand over redacted versions because they say, while they're happy to hand over anything relevant, the WhatsApp exchanges contain all sorts of information which might not just be irrelevant, but might also be personal, and therefore it would be improper to hand that over. Now, I believe the Cabinet Office is going to take that to court. It will be very interesting to see whether or not they win. I think that Sir James Eadie, a very senior lawyer who works for the government, argues that it's essential for protecting the principle of free cabinet debate and private cabinet debate. He's a better lawyer than me, but I don't know whether that's going to hold water. But it really highlights, I think, the tension between the fact that all of the law covering this stuff is old, right? The Inquiries Act dates back to 2005. The Public Records Acts are much older than that. The Freedom of Information Act dates back to, I think, 2001. And all of that predates WhatsApp, and it predates the age when politicians, advisors, and officials would have had something like WhatsApp, where they were simultaneously conducting official business, personal business, private business, and all the rest of it. So I suspect that the Cabinet Office will end up having to hand over everything. It's not as if Dame Heather's threatening to publish it all. She and her team simply wish to go through it. I think that's going to be a very hard argument to resist. But it does highlight the fact that we need to bring the law governing public records and public information up to date so that we don't have this kind of dispute in future, and it's clear what the status of WhatsApp messages and so on are when a judge comes knocking at the door.
Yeah, certainly. It seems very unclear as things stand. Henry, Sonia will give you a little break, more to discuss. Coming up, more of our paper review, including coverage of former President Donald Trump's court case in Miami, as seen here in The Guardian. We'll be talking about that next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now. Sonia Sodha, the chief leader writer at The Observer, and Henry Hill, the deputy editor of ConservativeHome. And Sonia, to you first. Front page of your paper, like many, also covering Donald Trump's historic court appearance, extraordinary. Obviously, he's pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. But even if convicted, it won't necessarily stop him from returning to the White House.
No, and that's just kind of quite a crazy thing to say, isn't it? So it's a huge story. Donald Trump is facing 37 charges of concealing classified documents from federal officials. He appeared in a Miami courtroom today. And, if he's found guilty of these charges, he could even end up in prison for decades. But that doesn't officially count him out of running for the presidency. Now, you might expect that a president, charged with these crimes, very, very serious crimes, facing a trial, facing a grand jury, that in the court of public opinion might prevent him from running for the presidency again. But the issue is, of course, that America is hugely divided. His very loyalist voters don't believe that he's guilty of these charges. Obviously, that's yet to be determined. And he is portraying this as a witch hunt to his supporters. Now, that's a familiar refrain to us here in the UK, because Boris Johnson has also been using that term in relation to the Privileges Committee report and whether he misled Parliament, which we'll be talking about later. But yes, it's he says it's a witch hunt, that these charges are jumped up, and there are lots of people in America who believe that. So incredible though it may sound, he may still yet end up running for the presidency again, even with these charges hanging over him.
And Henry, Boris Johnson still dominating many headlines as well. He's urging tonight the Privileges Committee to publish their report, and many of them are predicting quite how damning it could be for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good of him to urge them to publish it, but they were going to publish it anyway. And as far as I'm aware, they're going to publish it tomorrow anyway. But yes, absolutely. We haven't seen the Privileges report yet, but we can infer a lot from it, from the way Boris Johnson has responded to it. He was given advance sight of it on Friday, and he chose to resign from Parliament. which tells you, I think, an awful lot about what it's going to say. Now, the way this works is that effectively the Privileges Committee, which is a cross-party committee of MPs, which actually has a Conservative majority, although it's chaired by a Labour MP, have been investigating the allegation of whether or not Boris Johnson misled the House of Commons. They will recommend a sanction to the House of Commons, and the whole House of Commons, which again, remember, has a big Conservative majority, has to vote on it. And if they vote to suspend him for more than 10 days, then he is subject to what's called a recall petition. A recall petition means that 10% of the voters in his constituency can sign a petition to have a by-election. Now, that's important to understand, because essentially what this is, when he's alleging a witch hunt, as he is, and when he's calling the committee a kangaroo court, think about what the logic of that actually is. It means that a committee which has a Conservative majority, including a long-standing Brexiteer and a Tory MP from the Red Wall, has chosen to go for Boris Johnson, that they will make recommendations which the House of Commons, which has a Conservative majority, which he delivered not 3 years ago, will then vote for that. Then that 10% of his constituents will choose to have a recall a recall petition, and then that he would lose the by-election.
Yeah,
that's the allegation. That chain of events is what Boris Johnson is claiming is a witch hunt against him. It's absurd.
I forget how much you love the detail, Henry. We're going to have to move on. We're slightly short of time. Sonia, just a brief thought from you about the front page of the Eye. Just so many people concerned about their mortgages with interest rates set to rise.
Yeah, this is going to be a really worrying front page for so many people. So interest rates are now forecast to increase to 5.75% by the end of 2023, which means that we'll see mortgage rates upwards of 6%. Millions of people with fixed rate mortgages ending in the next 2-3 months who are going to have to try and refix at these new higher rates. That's going to add a huge amount onto people's monthly repayments at a time when the cost of living is going up, food and energy costs are higher. So I think it's a really worrying time for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly a huge concern for so many households. Sonia, Henry, thank you so much. Lots more to talk about in the next hour. We'll give you a little bit of a break. Thanks very much.